All right, everybody, welcome to the Curtain Call. It's been a while since we've done this show, but joining me as always is Tommy Jaggi, editor of Still Curtain, and I'll be your host today, Shayne Kubas, contributor to Still Curtain. Tommy, it's been a while since we've done the show, but I wanted to make sure we started now before the playoffs get started. I think it'd be a good time to talk about the season, talk about the Steelers a little bit more in our more laid back, relaxed way than our main show. Obviously, we're trying to be real professional and up to snuff on that show. We can be a little bit more fun on this one, so I think it'd be a good time to do that.
It's nice to get back to it after the holidays, Shayne. And fortunately, the power's back on here. If the Steelers get that weather on Sunday that we're having here in Corey, Pennsylvania right now, it's gonna be a low scoring affair.
Yeah, there's a lot of places around the country right now dealing with winter storm and winds and all sorts of stuff. We're getting a little bit here. I'm closer to the Pittsburgh area, so we are definitely getting it. But unfortunately, with the season, we will not be having a home playoff game, so we don't have to worry about the weather around here. But you're right. If it is that type of weather up in Buffalo, it could definitely impact things a little bit here. So before we get started, just to let you guys know if there's anybody in the chat that want to ask any questions about the Steelers season and anything to do with the Steelers, we're kind of breaking down the regular season, our thoughts on that. Biggest takeaways. We're going to start with that here and some other things going on around the league as well. So looks like we do have a couple comments here. Oh, Steeler, good morning. Good morning to you guys. If it's morning where you're at right now, definitely let us know how your morning's going and how you're feeling about the Steelers going into the playoffs here. But let's start here with our biggest takeaways from the regular season. So there's a lot of things that happened this regular season that was not exactly expected. We'll just put it that way. A lot of things happen that can't really predict between the different quarterbacks we've had to play with and play against, honestly. That's another thing, there too, and how the AFC stacked up and just all that. So what is the biggest takeaways from the regular season for you, Tommy, as far as the Steelers go?
Man, I think that you talk about the quarterback thing. I don't think that anybody would have envisioned playing the stretch of quarterbacks the Steelers played down the stretch. You go back and look at that list.
Yeah.
No Joe Burrow, no Lamar Jackson. And the last game they were resting guys. So I know that it's kind of mutual. It kind of cancels out because the Steelers were playing their third string quarterback. So is what it is. But that's one thing to know. And so the level of competition gets drastically harder entering this playoff game here with Josh Allen. They haven't seen a quarterback like that in a little while now. But as far as the takeaways for the Steelers go this season, like I thought the offensive line during the second half of the year, they really pulled things together. I know some people were nervous about the Siamalu signing early on. I think he's killed it. Like these last 6-7 weeks, maybe had the best game that he's had as a Pittsburgh Steeler just this past weekend. He's just grading roads. And so I think as the line goes, so did the running game. And the running game really picked up to become one of the best units in the league. Najee and Warren became one of the best tandems in the league. And I think that largely helped aid them in that final stretch. And so what was very peculiar to me, though, Shayne, was the running game was working when the Steelers were losing prior to that. So obviously, if we look at the biggest takeaways from this year, got to point to Mason Rudolph. It's not just him. There's a collection of factors here. The Steelers cut ties with their coordinators, and Pickett, unfortunately, only got less than 2 full quarters of play after his first start, which was a 16-point game. And I know everybody's like, all right, you got to put more points on the board. His first game with Faulkner and Sullivan as calling the shots there. And so the yardage output was what we wanted to see, was over 400 yards. Pickett gets injured the next game in the second quarter. Trubisky comes in. It was disastrous. So Rudolph really became like the focal point of this team. And the big storyline this year was you don't often get down to your third quarterback. And when you do, it rarely results in a playoff berth. And so I think that was the biggest storyline from the offensive side of the ball. On defense, Shayne, got to look at another phenomenal season by TJ Watt. Oh, yeah. I know that when you look at him in terms of pass rush win rate, the pressure rate, that kind of stuff, he's not going to be in the same tier as Micah Parsons, Myles Garrett, some of the guys at the top of the list who take more snaps off on the sidelines to recoup and doesn't have the same physical juice as some of those freaky athlete guys like that. But very, very good season all around. Graded out, I think, as the 5th best edge defender in the league this year. Led the NFL with 19 sacks. Just loads of production like he always does. And so showed up big. And so it pains me that he has this knee injury. I wish I could give him, I'd say one of my knees. I've already had an ACL tear in my right knee, but I can give him my left knee, Shay.
Yeah, just the MCL. Just the MCL.
That's right.
So it's not as bad.
That's right.
No. Yeah, I think a lot of what you said is definitely the biggest things. I mean, the quarterback situation across the league, and especially with the Steelers too, just so many backups, second, third, fourth string, even in some cases. I mean, you
Mhm.
could technically say fifth string with our rivals over the Browns there too, but just so many teams that had quarterback issues or quarterback injuries, and yet a lot of those teams are still in the playoffs. I mean, the Browns obviously the big one. The Bengals weren't that far off. We make it like a lot of teams that had some issues at the quarterback position still found a way to kind of get things done. And for me, I think the biggest takeaway, though, that I would look at, and this is just because of the way things played out, is the resiliency of this team, right? This is a team that
Mhm.
kind of in the middle of the season, even when we were, 7-3, 7-4, or whatever it was, there was a lot of questions we had about what kind of team this was. And I still think a lot of those questions are obviously still there, but I think for different reasons where the 7-7 mark when we had to win those last three games because of the disappointing losses to the Patriots of the world and the Cardinals, who, hey, that Cardinals loss doesn't look as bad the way they kind of play down the stretch.
No, they're pulling it together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So still, but some rough games in there that we definitely
Mhm.
should win. A team that wants to go to the playoffs normally would have to win, but we pulled out at the end thanks to the Titans, who talk about their situation a little bit actually because of a head coach that got fired there. But the resiliency of this team to win those last three games, and I know the Ravens game was against backups, whatever, they still got it done. They're on their third string quarterback. I mean, technically the Ravens had the edge of quarterback if we're trying to be technical there, even with with Mason playing there. So I think the resilience of this team, and I think the decisions that Tomlin made down the stretch really turned things around because there was a lot of questions about him too at that point in the season. Is he the guy that's going to get this team back to the playoffs even this year, but in the future?
Mhm.
Is he going to stick around for a long time? That there was questions about that from us and from the rest of Steelers media, right? So his decision making to one go to Rudolph when Trubisky didn't work out, to have the really just the fortitude to say, okay, I know that there's going to be some questions about this. I know that Mason probably should have started from the get go based on his playing. We need to do something else, right? And then to stick
Yeah.
with him despite Pickett being healthy because he knows that right now things are working and he doesn't want to upset that balance, right? All those are things that some other coaches might not do, right? They might not be willing to tell the first round pick, like, hey, I know you're healthy and it wasn't your fault that you got hurt and you weren't playing bad when you got hurt, but right now the offense is
Mhm.
working in a way that it hasn't this year. So
Yeah.
I think all those are big things. And like you said, defensively, another thing, I got to give it up to the young guys. Joey Porter Jr.
Mhm.
having a season that was worthy of his pick, not just his pick, but a top 10 pick, in my opinion. I think he could have easily been a top 10 pick based on what he's done this year as a rookie. And then Keanu Benton, I know he didn't play as much as we would like him to. And Herbig as well, kind of in that same category. Both of those guys make impacts despite not having huge snap totals. And now Herbig especially
Mhm.
might have to kind of jump that up here in this playoff game. We'll talk about that too. But the rookies really kind of showed out this year, especially defensively.
Yeah, they absolutely did. I mean, certainly reason to be encouraged about this rookie
Yes,
class as we
absolutely.
move into the future because I think it's going to be rock solid. I think it has potential to rival that 2017 class.
Mhm.
Not they're not getting a TJ Watt out of
No,
this
I
class,
don't
but
think so now, but
it's been like 5 straight years of like constant mediocrity at best in the NFL
yeah,
draft,
one
and then
hit or
you
two
finally
here and yeah.
it I know, and really looks like so far, Shane, that they have struck gold with this. I mean, if Broderick turns out, and which it looks like
Mhm,
he's going to, you mentioned Porter. I think Porter has a chance to be one of the lockdown cornerbacks in the
mhm.
NFL. There are not many guys built like he is with the physicality and the ability to hip and mirror the way that he does. And so I think it's just going to be a really, really solid class all around that can kind of rebuild the foundation of this team.
Yeah, absolutely, and I did see some people, and this is showing some people's age or lack thereof, but there was people telling me, "This is the best Steelers
Mm.
class ever." It's like, guys, do you not know, like, about the
Yeah.
70s? There's a whole
Yes.
class that was basically just
74
Hall of
class. Yeah.
Famers. Yeah, like, 7 like,
Hmm.
let's pump the brakes. Like, really good class. I mean, recent history, sure. But yeah,
Yeah.
it is funny. But no, I think those guys are definitely the kids are all right for sure. Right. We'll say that. But let's move on to some stuff here with the Steelers and the playoffs, right? Again, we weren't sure about the playoffs. We got the win against the Ravens, and we needed some help. And luckily for us, Derrick Henry is still that guy. He is still Jaguar killer. He really helps take that team down. Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars. There's some talk about the curse with the terrible towel, that whole thing. I don't know how much I believe it, but I will say if you're an NFL team, if you are a player on an NFL team, if there is something that is considered sacred to the other team and you beat them and you mess with it,
Mhm.
just know that if karma's out there, it's probably not on your side. Maybe just don't. Maybe just take your win, get out of there. live to see another day. Because if you're the Jaguars fans right now, if you're the Jaguars team, you are reeling after 8-3 at one point was being 8-3, and to finish 9-8,
Yeah.
miss the playoffs. It's real devastating, but we're not going to worry about them. We're the ones that 7th seed. We're the ones who get in there. So Steelers are in the playoffs. Can they make some noise? This is the question, because we all knew that there was a good chance, especially even when we were 7-4, and even going into the year, we knew there was a good chance they could compete for a playoff spot. And even though it looked kind of dire there for a while, we end up getting in. That was never really the question. It's, can we do anything now that we're here? And I think, weirdly enough, I'm more confident now that they would have a shot in a playoff game than I was at any point during their better stretch of the season when they were 7-4 and kind of rolling a little bit, because the offense has shown some life under Mason Rudolph, and because the coordinator change happens and you get a chance to build up some things, get some things set up where you can go to your run game even more confidently. You can do some more stuff in the passing game. But we have a tough road as a 7th seed. We have to go to Buffalo to start off, and they're obviously on a roll, winning their division, beating the Dolphins in the last game of the year. So I'll just throw it out there. Do you think that they can make some noise in the playoffs, even if it's just giving the Bills a tough game?
Well, first of all, I agree with you, Shayne, that I've never been more optimistic about this 2023 Steelers throughout the season than we are right now. And it's because they have scored points in these last 3 games with Rudolph, the switch in the offensive coordinator. Prior to that, there was just no reason to believe that a team averaging 15 offensive points per game is going to compete with anybody. And so it's kind of like you look at the New England Patriots, like they're a legitimately bad team, not because their defense is awful, but because they can't score points. And that's kind of how it felt. The Steelers were kind of like a glorified version of that early on. The ability to put 2 30-point games in the final 3 games of the season. And obviously things could have gone differently, I think, in Baltimore had it not been just like this mud bowl, torrential downpour. So scoring 17 in that game. I mean, Rudolph obviously completed 18 of 20 passes, and I think he broke the completion percentage record, which, I mean, it's kind of just a meaningless stat at the end of the day. But it still goes to show you that things have been better. And so, yes, more encouraging. However, the Steelers are the biggest underdogs, not surprising, the biggest underdogs in Wild Card Weekend. That line has moved, Shayne, from 9.5 points in favor of Buffalo up to 10 points now. And so it's getting bet the wrong direction. I don't think that a lot of people are confident in this team. And again, you look at the factors here. You are going into a playoff game with your 3rd string quarterback and without your best player, more than likely. And so that is what kills me, because I've seen TJ Watt play so well against Josh Allen and the Bills before, where he really gets him flustered. He contained him from escaping on his edge. I think he had a 3-sack game against the Bills in the past. They only allowed 16 points in that game. Last year, when the Steelers played the Bills, it came in week 5. Kenny Pickett was the quarterback. You did not have TJ Watt. He was out with the pec tear. The Steelers lost 38-3. And so the Bills have that kind of upside to have one of those games against you. And so it makes me wonder, even look ahead at a factor like the weather, Shayne. Like, does bad weather potentially favor the Steelers this week? Will it negate some of what the big playability from Buffalo's offense? Is it going to hurt the Steelers in that way? Do they need to have a game like they kind of had in Baltimore, where it's like, we'd rather have bad weather, and that way it kind of neutralizes the playing field a little bit here? A lot of factors to consider this week. But like you said, I do think there is at least some reason to be optimistic because of the games that we have seen from Mason Rudolph. Can he string together a couple of those dime throws on those deep posts where guys can run after the catch and make a big play for a touchdown, like we've seen each of the past 3 weeks? And so if he can do those type of things, even just one house call like that, that could be enough to shift the tides in this game. The big question obviously becomes, what can you do without TJ Watt? Can you get enough pressure going against Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown with what you have available? Can Highsmith have the game of his life? Like, I think it's going to come down to those type of questions this week.
Yeah, we have some chats here real quick talking about the game. Everyone's writing off the Steelers again. Let's go. Yeah, I mean, they're gonna, with the way that they're playing versus the way the Bills are playing. More Mason Rudolph magic here from Jeremiah. He's one of the guys from the Steelers Realm podcast I guest on as well. I'm glad to see you here, Jeremiah. But yeah, again, I think that there's more reason to believe than normal that the Steelers can win a game without TJ Watt in general, right? Because this is not just a normal game. We're 1-10 when games he doesn't play. I think is the updated what you
Yes.
tweeted out here recently. But again, like that's kind of my biggest factor is I think if a healthy TJ Watt was in this game, I'd be much more willing to pick the upset. But because he's not in
Mhm.
there, it comes down to what do you get from Golden and Herbig, right? And I think, and more importantly, how do you use them? Because I think Golden, to me at least, what should happen is he should get a lot of the early down work because he is the more stout defender. He's
Mhm.
bigger than Herbig. He's more experienced. I think you leave him in on early downs, but I think Herbig has to be the primary pass rusher on third downs because he has the juice, he has the bend
Yeah.
around the pitch. Like I think if they use those two correctly, you could get a facsimile of TJ in terms of how they use him. And I think Herbig can also do some of the drops, like spot drop coverage that TJ does and all this. So you can mimic a lot of what you do. It's just not going to be obviously to the same level, really probably close to the same level. But I am more confident than ever that they can at least be competent opposite Highsmith versus the last couple years where
Mhm.
it was pretty much him or nothing if TJ was out. So I will
Yeah.
give them that it does make me feel a little bit better. But kind of like what you said, I think a lot of the factor of this game is going to be the weather, actually. I think that might be the biggest kind of equalizer here is if the weather's bad. And that's not saying Josh Allen can't play in bad weather or they can't throw or whatever else. But him and Diggs have been kind of off this year, especially down the stretch. Gabe Davis might not, probably won't, if I had to guess, play in this game with his knee injury that he had. They said that it's kind of iffy, but I feel like they probably believe that they can get past this without him, so they don't want to risk him getting hurt. There's a chance that a lot of their deep passing game isn't going to be there without him and without Diggs and him working well together recently. If you can prevent the big plays and
Mhm.
you can coax some of those mistakes out of Josh Allen that he's been prone to this year more than ever, as good as he is, he might give you just enough opportunities to score points where you can at least stay in the game with them, right? And I think the run game is going to obviously have to dominate. You have to stop their run game. That's kind of been the catalyst of their turnaround is James Cook as a runner and as a receiver. All those things are things that you can take advantage of, I think, in a weather game where Najee and Jalen can hopefully control the line of scrimmage, control the ball, and let Mason just have those, hopefully, a couple opportunities to make some plays.
Yeah, and going back to the pass rush for a second here, Shayne, this is not a situation like it was the previous year where you've got now Malik Reed suddenly thrust
Yeah,
into
that's
the
not the
lineup
same.
who has no business really being on an NFL roster, honestly. And so your depth is a lot better than the snaps that they've played. And so I've said all season long, I think that Watt should be resting more,
Yep.
Highsmith should be resting more, and Golden and Herbig have proved to be solid and capable players when they're out on the field. Now, having said that, you do not have the threat of a presence like TJ Watt this week. And so everything that you would normally shift to Watt is going to be shifted to Highsmith, I would have to imagine. But I completely agree with the game script. You should be playing Golden on the early down work. Not that he can't get after the quarterback, because he can. We've seen some good examples of that, and he's graded out really well this year. But that's Herbig's forte. Like that is his specialty. Let him go. Even put him on Watt's side over there as the left edge, have him go against a 6'9" Spencer Brown and see if he can just dip right underneath him and get a quick pressure, because I think you're going to want that guy on the field in pass rush situations to maximize his ability there, and knowing that he's small, undersized when it comes to the run defense stuff. So I will be interested. They can't sustain another injury at that position. If you do, you are going to be toast, and you're going to have to play some oversized guys there just to try to make up the difference. And so you got to come away with this unscathed there. You need to be healthy coming out of that game if they are to pull off the upset here. And then you talked about the defensive backfield. I think it's going to be Porter that mirrors Diggs, and I think that that's the right call. Like,
you have to
let anybody else beat you. If Gabe Davis comes back, whatever. If he beats you once or twice down the field, we can live with that. You cannot let Diggs, their biggest threat on offense, kill you. And I think that having Porter match him all over the field is the right call. The one that I really worry about, Shayne, I think Dalton Kincaid can have one of those like 9-catch, 90-yard type of games that just keeps moving the chains, and the Steelers can't get them off the field. They've got to find a way to tighten the chains a little bit there when it comes to their linebacker play. I think having Minka back is going to help. But again, the guy has missed so much time this year with the hamstring injury, with the knee injury. I don't know how good he's going to be right away coming his first action back in like 4 weeks. And so I'll be interesting to see what happens there. But take away that biggest threat and hope that you can force Josh Allen into a couple bad decisions.
Yeah, that's the thing. Josh will make those decisions. He will just throw it into coverage because he thinks he can get away with it, or just because he's willing to do it. And I respect his game. I really do. I think it ultimately works out because obviously they win the division and he has all the touchdowns and everything. So I'm not going to hold the turnovers against him too much, especially because a lot of them tend to be like, I'm just throwing this. It's 3rd and 12. I'm throwing it to the end zone. If it gets picked off, I don't care. And I think there's an element of truth to that. Like, right, does it really matter that much if he gets picked off in the end zone if it's 3rd and 12 and you're going to punt anyway? Like, it obviously you don't want to have a Hail Mary return situation like the Jets had earlier this year, if you remember that one against the Dolphins. That's not good. But outside of that, it's not so bad. But I think, like you talked about, the defensive backfield is going to be so important because we're going to have the healthiest version of it that we've had in quite a while. At least we should. KZ is going to be allowed to come back. We'll see if he's up to par conditioning wise. I think they talked about that. Minka should play. Is he going to be as much as he normally would? I hope not. Honestly, I kind of hope we don't have to play him all the time. I think Thompson should be back probably. Rowe, like all these guys. We have a lot of safeties now. The linebackers are still questionable for sure. I think Jack has performed relatively well. I think him having fresh legs and his knees aren't tired yet and all that probably helps. But yeah, it's going to be really tough to stop this offense because even if, again, Diggs isn't a huge factor, let's say Porter can lock him down mostly, or just those two aren't on the same page. Kincaid's a threat. Khalil Shakir is a guy I like a lot. He's had a lot of good plays for them this year, had a big play against the Dolphins. Like, they have guys who you have to worry about, not even to mention James Cook in the running game like I talked about before. So it's going to be a tough one no matter how you look at it. And even if everything goes our way, it doesn't mean we'll win. But I think people will be surprised at how tough this game could end up being for the Bills, though.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either. And like you said, weather conditions obviously play a factor. You need to have Allen, I think, have one of those games. And there's a question raised, which one will be facing? That's the problem. Are we going to get the Allen that's going to make it put up a 38-point game like he did last time around when these teams face each other last year? Or is it going to be the guy that throws 2 picks in the red zone like he did against the Dolphins last week, gave them a fighting chance in that game? And really, if it wasn't for the big kickoff return, I mean, the Dolphins, they hung with them right there. And I think the Steelers will have a chance to hang. I really do. At the end of the day, it's hard to predict them as winners when you are such heavy underdogs. I know this would have been the case. And I heard this would have been the case whether or not they were playing in Kansas City this week or in Buffalo. The line would have been pretty similar. And it goes to show you why. I mean, again, Steelers are without their best player. They're starting their 3rd-string quarterbacks. You've had holes at linebacker, cornerback, and safety. And so you really need to, if there's a time for everybody to just be all on the same page, like it's right now. So what you can't do, and I will say this definitively, you cannot have another game where George Pickens is not targeted. I love the way that he handled it. It showed more maturity than he has throughout his college career and NFL so far combined, by being a good teammate and celebrating with his team despite not getting targeted. But you've got to throw to the guy. You are not going to be able to have one of these games where you can come away with a victory if you do not target George Pickens. He's going to have to make some of those plays down the field, maybe even escape for a big score. You're going to need to maximize your big play ability as much as possible, and throwing to him is going to be part of that.
Yeah, and this secondary for the Bills has been decimated by injuries at different times and just poor play. I mean, I have a lot of Bills guys I talk to, I do stuff with, and one of them, I mean, the safety duo of Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer has been great for, a long time. They are not the same players anymore. Yeah. And I think you can take advantage of, like you said, some of those post routes and the things over the middle of the field. If you give them an opportunity to split those safeties, I think both the top receivers can definitely do that. Even a guy like Calvin Austin, I know we haven't seen much from him in the passing game for a while, but he's always a threat to break one open, especially on a defense like this. And it's going to take some big plays in the passing game, and I think Mason has shown enough for me to believe he can get some of them. But again, it's Mason Rudolph, right? Like we know what he is ultimately. And as much as that's another thing, we'll talk about this probably more as the season, ends and whenever we get in the offseason. But there's been so many people saying like, it would be idiotic if Mason isn't the unquestioned starter going into 2024. And it's like, guys, listen, no one was more willing to advocate for Mason to be the starter whenever Pickett went down than me, right? I am 100% on board. I was like, I do not want to see that man Trubisky get on this field. I don't care how much they're paying him. I would rather pay him to go home. Like, I was on that train. But for you to say that Mason Rudolph has earned the ability to be the unquestioned starter going into 2024 is just asinine. I'm sorry. It's a cool story. I'm really happy for him. I think it's going to extend his career for a long time, whether it's with us or someone else. but we need to stop with this, right? I don't know what the answer is at quarterback. I'm not going to pretend like I do or know what they're going to do. But if that's their plan, I don't know. That's all I'll say about that. So
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty condemning against their front office if you were willing to go into next season saying, we're just going to let Rudolph and Pickett duke it out. And that's that. I mean, that is our quarterback race. And so you've got to you're always got to look for ways to improve.
yeah,
And again, nothing against what Rudolph has done. I think it's been spectacular. But if we look at this for what it is, it's a 3-game stretch. We'll see how he does in game number 4 here of his 4th game since playing back in 2021. Rudolph will be a 29-year-old quarterback next season, going into his 7th NFL season with, I mean, less than 20 starts under his belt. And we're going to say this is now our franchise quarterback. Always look, never, ever settle at the quarterback position. That's been my philosophy until you know. And I've said this before too, Shayne. When you have a franchise quarterback, you will know it. You will not have to question it. I'll give you an example. The Houston Texans know without a shadow of a doubt they've got a franchise quarterback. When you have one, like we did with Roethlisberger, you will know it, and it will not take as long as it has with Kenny Pickett, unfortunately. And I don't want to dampen anybody's hopes there that that's going to turn around, but you will know it. And I think that you typically know 99% of the time, you know early on, and you know before his first 25 starts, unlike Pickett. And so I think that if Pickett finds a way to make it work at this point, going into age 26 season in year 3, that'll be a rarity compared to what we've seen in the past. Like these guys and these teams aren't unfamiliar with that. Like the Jets knew Zach Wilson's not their guy. That's why they went out and got Aaron Rodgers. The 49ers knew Trey Lance wasn't their guy, despite trading 3 first-round picks for him. So they played the guy that they believe is their guy, and Brock Purdy is going to be that guy for them. And so don't stop until you have that guy is my philosophy. And when you know it, or when you have it, you will know who it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going into next year, like if they don't upgrade a quarterback in the draft or for agency, then I do think that they're limiting themselves. But especially if they give Rudolph the reins outright, like I think a competition between him and Pickett, if you don't add to the quarterback room, that's pretty much a given. Like you don't want to just give the job right back to a guy that didn't exactly, earn it just with his play on the field. But I think it also matters a lot what they decide to do at offensive coordinator, right? Do they try to stick it out with the guys they have, which would be a mistake in my opinion? Do they look for someone outside the organization to bring something in that maybe fits Pickett better, or whoever they end up trying to go to quarterback with? Like that's going to matter more than anything else too. So, but that's a topic for another day. Let's jump into some news around the NFL that also might impact the Steelers. That also just could end up having the Steelers be a conversation as part of it. Multiple head coaches gone. More could be coming. We have 6 openings currently, 3 in the middle of the season and 3 recently since the season ended. Arthur Smith goes from the Falcons. Obviously, that was kind of expected with the way their season ended. Mike Vrabel, a little bit more shockingly, I would say, gone from Tennessee today. And obviously, you lose Ron Rivera with the Commanders as well, which everyone also expected with the way their season ended. So, and that's on top of the Chargers opening up and the Raiders and other teams. So, there could be more. There's still talk about Bill Belichick. Is that going to be a thing? I don't know. It kind of feels still crazy to me, but at the same time, I get it on both sides, honestly. The Saints have their issues with the way their game ended, even though they won. Like Dennis Allen kind of seemed like maybe he lost the locker room a little bit with the way that they kind of just went rogue, if you saw how that went. A lot of questions still from other coaches, but there's been some talk about Mike Tomlin. Not so much about any chance of him being fired, of course, especially with how the regular season finished. But maybe talk about him wanting to walk away for a while, possibly. So there's different things have been alluded to that kind of make it sound like he may want to take a break from coaching. He's done it for a long time now, obviously. What do you think there's any truth to that? Obviously we won't know until after the season and maybe longer, but do you feel that sense at all? Do you get that feeling?
Yeah, I think that there's more truth to it than what fans would want to admit, or they think that is actually happening. I mean, this came from Jay Glazer about a month ago, I believe.
Yes, that was the first mention.
Glazer obviously has a connection with Tomlin, is friends with Mike Tomlin. And so, but this is hardly the first time that we're hearing this. I think it was Rappaport that also said back then. And then just recently, Adam Schefter said that it wouldn't be a total surprise, paraphrasing, of course, if Tomlin decided to take some time off. And so, this is not the first time that you would see this happen in the NFL. And I think the perfect example, and something that almost mirrors it to a T, is the example of Sean Payton in his tenure with the New Orleans Saints. Payton was the head coach for 15 years. in New Orleans, obviously had a tremendous track record, including the Super Bowl win, a bunch of playoff appearances, a bunch of playoff wins. And then all of a sudden, after 15 years, he wants to take some time off. He has 1 year left on his contract, just like Mike Tomlin does right now, which is why it's so similar that way. Takes that time off. The Saints are able to deal him to the Broncos for a first, second, and third round pick, future picks. And now they just restock their draft capital. He wanted that fresh start. If Tomlin is feeling that way, like he's kind of feeling the pressure, like, all right, if Steelers lose this game, let's say they get massacred against the Bills in the playoffs, this will be the third straight blowout loss in the playoffs. And this will be the 7th consecutive season the Steelers do not have a single playoff win. And that right there, and I have to mention this, and again, it's not against Tomlin. I think Tomlin is a terrific coach and he's had a wonderful career with the Steelers. Tomlin is the longest tenured coach in the NFL who still has a job, who has not won a playoff game for that span. And so if you don't have the prerequisite, if you don't have the reputation that Tomlin already had coming into this playoff win drought, then you don't keep your job this long. And so you never see somebody do that. And so I think that there is reason to walk both sides of the fence here, Shayne, where you can say, yes, Tomlin is a good coach, but we have seen this work out for other teams who have moved on from good coaches only to be better. And I give the Andy Reid example where the Eagles won a Super Bowl, 2 years later after moving on from Andy Reid and going to Doug Peterson, because they got a spark with that. And you could have a Hall of Fame coach and it still could be the right decision. It still could be time. Things get stale. And I think that we've seen that with the Steelers. And again, it's nothing against his legacy-like career, but again, if we do indeed go 7 seasons without a playoff win, there is no other head coach in the league that can keep their job that long. And even if you give the Patriots example, Bill Belichick has not had a streak that long. His streak was a 5-year streak. I think maybe 6 years. This year it was shorter than Tomlin's, and he still might lose his job as the greatest coach in the history of the NFL. And so there comes a time for everybody. This is so similar to what we've seen with Sean Payton, and it wouldn't shock me. In fact, I think you could make a strong argument that knowing you could get draft capital out of Tomlin, you could get that fresh start you want and move forward with the younger GMs who want to kind of go in a different direction with things. It could kind of be that scenario that ends up working out for both parties.
And I think that's the key thing here is I think the reason this happens isn't because of anything of them deciding, oh, well, you're not a good coach anymore, or you're not even a coach that we want to keep around. Does Tomlin look at this and go, man, I've been at this for a long time now with the Steelers. We've been in this really weird place where like I'm too good of a coach to lose to get premium players, but I'm also not quite good enough to get us over the hump with what we have. And there's an argument to be said, like how many coaches could do more than with this team than he does. And I think that list is short, but the issue ultimately, like you said, it's a question of, is it just time for both sides to address this with a different move, right? Where he moves on to somewhere else, continues to coach and probably be a very good one. And for better or for worse, the Steelers decide we need to just try something else. I think that's the argument here. It's not so much whether or not Tomlin deserves to have his job or have a job as coaching the NFL. It's more about, is this the right combination of coach and team anymore? And I do think that's very much in question. And I think Tomlin's also maybe wondering that himself. I think that's where this is coming from. I don't think the front office, or I don't think the ownership is saying, hey, Mike, you might want to take a break for a while. Like, I don't think that's happening. I think that's all him if it is happening. And I think it'll be curious to see how this plays out depending on how the playoffs go. But we do have some comments here on this as well. 7 years with no playoff win will be a new ugly record since the Super Bowl era started in 1967. The old school Steelers fans know it. Yeah, again, the Steelers have been so consistently good for pretty much all of recent and even not so recent NFL history, right? They've been consistently great. There's been some blips there in the 80s, obviously, and I wasn't around for that, but I've heard plenty of people talk about it and everything like that. So there's definitely been lulls in their dominance, but this team is just so consistently always a part of things. And we haven't had a first overall pick since Bradshaw. Like that. I mean, there's so many years of being a team in the NFL and not having that pick. And there's other teams that I think also fall in that category, but it's just really weird to think about, with how long it's been, what do we look like after Tomlin? And with only having 3 head coaches in like 50 something years, it is just a weird feeling as a Steelers fan to even consider it.
Yeah, and I think that the way that you described it is perfect, Shayne. You don't fire a coach who has never had a losing season in 17
Yeah.
years. And say what you want about the stat. I think that it is impressive. You can say that it's Cowher's inherited team, whatever you want to say, that's fine. But no other team does that. At the same time, it's odd to have a situation where you don't have a losing season and yet you don't have a playoff win in seven
You're just in
7
this
years.
really
And so
weird mid place.
it
Yeah, like
really is. And so you're in that situation. And that's why I use the word stale. I think things have just gotten stale where
a
you
little
can
bit.
be
Yeah.
an above average team, but you just plateaued. Like I think they've plateaued over the last 5 or 6 years. They really haven't gotten any better. And in fact, they might have gotten, they have gotten worse on paper. There's no doubt in terms of their statistics. You measure them compared to the rest of the league, their point differential at the end of the season. I mean, Steelers are, a couple of years now with negative point differential. That's not really a recipe. And it really doesn't show that they're as good as their record would indicate. But they have plateaued. And I think if you go a 7th year, you've got to at least mull it over. If you're the Pittsburgh's front office, maybe you have a conversation with Tom and just say, hey, what do we think? I
What are
know,
you thinking? What should we do with?
yeah, because I think that needs to be said. And like I said, Shayne, I think that there's a very, very realistic scenario where this could work out for both parties if they mutually decided to part ways. If Tomlin doesn't find postseason success this year, Tomlin could go. He could essentially have his pick of the litter. You can go
Probably
anywhere you want. And Tomlin's going to be a very, very marketable name. He's going to be able to pick between several organizations in the city that he wants to be in, and the Steelers will be able to get their fresh start. They'll be able to bring in a guy with maybe a little bit more innovative for today's NFL. Someone who can hire their own coaching staff, get new guys in the building who's not just one collective group think. And then maybe find more success down the road. Now, in the process of doing that, gain much needed draft capital to help rebuild the roster of this next generation. So it is very interesting. This is not a storyline that's going to go away. I don't believe. I think this is going to be the talk of the Steelers offseason is what is going to happen with Tomlin. If I will say this, Shayne, if the Steelers and Tomlin, essentially Tomlin decides this is what he wants, I really, really hope that he gives the Steelers the courtesy of letting them know extremely early in the process, like a week after the season ends, if he has a decision by then, because you could get wiped out in terms of the coaching candidates this year. There are some really, really strong candidates. I love a guy like Ben Johnson. Jim Harbaugh reportedly wants to come to the NFL. Guy wins 70% of his NFL games in his four seasons as an NFL coach. There are prospects out there that would be like, boy, this is a perfect fit, but they'd have to know early enough in the process. Otherwise you could be left getting the leftover scraps here. And you don't want that, especially knowing how long the Steelers have kept these head coaches. Each of their last 3 head coaches for the Pittsburgh Steelers have played have coached a minimum of 15 years in that role. If the Steelers plan to do the same thing, the Rooneys plan to keep that guy for the foreseeable future, you're going to want a guy that's a really, really strong candidate. And so hopefully he gives them the due diligence. If it comes to that, again, this is all hypothetical. This is Tomlin's decision and basically his only.
And that's the thing about it. That's why it's really hard to talk about it too much, because it's so the Steelers just don't have this. We don't have this conversation about the Steelers, right? And not only that, but Tomlin is probably going to be the one who controls his fate, right? It's not a question of whether they want to have him leave, but I think it's going to be whether he feels it's best for him and maybe for the organization. And I think I have a feeling he already kind of has a feeling about it, not necessarily regardless of the playoff success or lack thereof, but just in general, his kind of feelings about where he's at and where the team is at. And I do think that if a decision is to be made, if there is one to make at all, I do think he will have that decision relatively quickly in the process, and that will help them. And you talked about you don't want to get lost in the hiring process. I will say, like, I wasn't obviously following it strongly at the time because I was about 9 years old, 10 years old, but Tomlin wasn't exactly the hottest name in the world whenever we hired him back in 2007. Like he wasn't this like all-star, like every single person, every single team was trying to hire this guy. Like we kind of struck gold with him in terms of like he wasn't one of those premium hires. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to do that this time around if we can, but the way this team does things, like you never know if it's going to be another 17-year guy that was kind of obscure and they brought him in and he figures it out. I don't think getting that right 4 years or 4 times in a row is very likely. I mean, granted, the Packers have done it with quarterbacks and like other teams have done it with certain things, but it's certainly a question of like who would that guy be and what is their identity? Like what identity wants this team to have. So definitely gonna be interesting to see how it plays out. But our last topic here, and this is something we just like I wanted to do just because I thought it'd be fun. Just kind of laugh at ourselves a little bit. What were you most wrong about, or what were we most wrong about collectively, if we shared this opinion about this season? Like, obviously, the playoffs haven't happened yet. We could be right or wrong about our thoughts on the playoff success and everything else. But what do you think you were most wrong about, looking at prior to the season starting about this team?
Absolutely nothing, Shayne. No, I know there are plenty of things that I was. We obviously couldn't predict the way that things transpired here.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I will say I was very high on the draft class, and I'm glad that they're looking good so far.
Yeah, we were right about that for sure.
I will say if I go back to just the preseason, like let me talk about Kenny Pickett for a second here. I was not a Kenny Pickett fan during the draft process. I had him 48th on my board. I had a 2-3 grade on him. However, when I watched the guy during the preseason, he swayed me a little bit, like he did with a lot of fans. Excuse me. So I did not expect the struggles during the season that we saw with him. I did not expect like 160 passing yards a game, and just his inability really to get like just 2-score games, like to find a way to get like multi-touchdown performances or even like 200 passing yard performances. I thought it would come easier to him than what it did. And so I think I got my hopes a little bit too high because of what we saw in the preseason, because of what I saw a couple of days spent down in Latrobe for Steelers training camp. I think I kind of abandoned my initial evaluation of him for a moment there to think that things would be better than what they were. And I did predict the Steelers would go 9-8. It's just not at all the way that I thought it would go either. So I have to say that I think I had the Steelers winning all 3 of the Cardinals, Patriots, and Colts games. So got the record prediction right. Did not get the games that they would win and lose correct.
Yeah, and honestly, I think I'm there with you on a lot of this stuff. And I wanted to throw this up real quick from Ryan here. As a younger Steelers fan, I missed the fire we had in the late 2000s, early 2010s. Superb defense, but an offense that complemented them. Right now, we're a puddle of meh, it seems. I think for the most part, I agree with that. I think there's definitely some truth to that this team doesn't have the same aura around it that they had in those 2000s, early 2010s, right? There was a level of respect that other teams had to have when facing us that I don't think is quite the same. I think teams are still always worried that we're gonna drag them down with us, right? And I think that's what the Bills have to be worried about is when we're playing a team that we are clearly better than, all bets are off. Absolutely. We could end up losing, like it's a whole thing. But we have a tendency to tear those good teams and bring them down onto our level and make them duke it out. And that's kind of why that playoff game, as much as the spread is indicating that it's kind of a blowout opportunity, I'm not willing to say that it would be. But to what I was wrong about again, too, I think I was also swayed by Pickett. I was also a little bit bigger of a fan of him than you were for sure, just in general. And I think the problem, too, and you talk about the multiple touchdown games, to be fair, Mason has 3 touchdowns in 3 games too. So this is a passing offense that just does not score the football right now. Obviously, the running game has been a big factor of that. They've taken a lot of touchdowns in the red zone, but this passing offense is just not conducive to scoring points, and not just not good, but also not even when they are good, it doesn't lead to touchdowns through the air. And it's really frustrating because, again, the numbers for Kenny and Steelers quarterbacks just look so bad that it almost makes them underrated because they're not actually that. They're not playing at a less than touchdown per game level. They don't score touchdowns in the air with this team. And it sucks because as much as I don't think Kenny has proven anything to be a starter in this league long term, I think he still has a lot to prove if he gets a chance next year. It's almost I feel like I almost have to defend him sometimes still because I'm like, he's not that bad, guys. It's just the offense is so they're so reliant on scoring touchdowns on the ground that it just looks worse than it is, right? Even Mason's 2 touchdown game, he had to rely on 180 yards of almost felt like of yards after catch just to get them because we weren't in the red zone. He had to get explosive plays from Pickens, and it just doesn't always happen, right? And it happened more with him in the last 3 games, but it's tough. It really is tough on this offense to score points through the air. So that is something I was definitely, not super right about. I was definitely more on the, he could be a guy for sure. And we'll see if it plays out. And then my record prediction too, I think it was 10-7. It might have been 9-8 with you. I'd have to go back and look, but again, not the way I thought it was going to happen. I mean, I didn't think we'd beat the Ravens twice. I didn't think we'd go 5-1 in the division in general. Like this team being 5-1 in the AFC North is so funny to me. And I understand one of those wins is with the Ravens playing their backups and everything else, but it's for this division to be easily the best in football, but like a huge margin winning, like record wise. Everyone has a winning record. First time that's been done in the merger. Like for us to be 5-1 in that division is just hilarious, right? Like makes no sense whatsoever. And that's why this team is so fun to talk about, because we have no idea what to do half the time with it.
Yeah, there's not a person that would have predicted that, honestly, Shayne. Because last year, every team in the AFC North went 3-3, and they were all even Steven, right against each other. 5-1. If I would have told you the Steelers are going 5-1 in the AFC North against the league's strongest division, you would be like, oh, this is like a 12, 13 win football team.
They might be the number one seed. What the heck happened? Did Kenny throw 30?
Yeah, but when you drop games against the Cardinals and the Patriots and the stuff that you shouldn't lose, that's what makes them a team that's just barely getting in with some outside help to get into that final playoff spot there. And so just so interesting how things just transpired throughout the year. Just such a roller coaster ride, which is what we've come to see in the past with this team. And then somehow it always ends up in the same. Or we're stuck in like Groundhog Day, where every time week 18 matters to the Steelers somehow, and they need like a series of events to go their way, like in the final week, for them to get into the postseason. And so it's just interesting.
It's so funny because we talk about this team and like how Tomlin always gets his 9 wins, right? Or in some cases 8 wins to keep it from being a losing season. And when we were 7-7 and we had to play a Seahawks team that they were hoping would make the playoffs or trying to fight for a playoff spot, a Bengals team that also was right there with us and trying to edge us out. And then you go play the Ravens, granted backups, whatever, but that was because they got the number 1 seed the week before. No one was saying, oh, they're going to make the playoffs. No one was saying, oh, Tomlin's definitely going to get his 9 wins still, even with the way this team is playing. Yeah. And of course, he somehow does it. And I'm telling you, there's something about that man in terms of like he is more committed. Now, he will never say this because he doesn't actually believe this. I really don't think he does. But there's something about like there's a pride within that organization for him of like, we do not want to be the team that doesn't get him a winning season, because that would be devastating to everyone in that building, because he's done it with literally every other group of guys he's ever coached with. And it worked out. They go 3-0 the last 3 games. They get not even 9-10 wins. Like that was maybe the thing that was the least surprising technically, even though it looked like it was going to be surprising the way it was going. He finds a way to get it done still. And we're right back where we always are. We're going to be picking in the 20s, or should be right around the 20s. And we'll see how it plays out. But I think that's the part that's so funny about it, Tommy, is that every year we have the same conversations because they can't get out of that middle ground of like, yeah, we're good, but like we're kind of not really good, but Tomlin just refuses for us to be bad. So we have to keep working with just being okay. And like, it's always something with it, right? It's always something. Oh, yeah. So it's fun to talk about though, right? Like we can't complain. And that's the sad part is Steelers fans, when they complain, I'm like, man, I get it. You want more. I want more. I know you want more. Everyone wants more. Just look at the Panthers for a minute. Like go see how their fans are reacting to things. Go check out even the Bears, who had a strong end of the year. Like they have so much uncertainty within their organization. Like, what are they going to do with all these picks? Is it going to work out? Are they going to blow it? Like, and they just, all of them assume they're going to blow it because they're all so afraid of them doing it. Right. Like look around the league and think about, like, at the end of the day, we have less to worry about, even if we also have less things that could end up happening good for us. It's this weird dynamic that we have.
Yeah, we're spoiled, no doubt. I mean, there's no other way to put it. So we've had success for so long. I've lived through and enjoyed a pair of Super Bowl wins. Yes. And so, but I think that we get hungry for more of that. And I think that's where every Steelers fan is right now. Like, we don't want to go another year without this postseason success. And so that's where we are. And it comes back to that conversation again. Are we okay with being plateaued as a good but not great team? I think that we're getting hungry for that time, so much so to the point where some people would say, yeah, I'd rather have the losing season if it inspires real change. And I get the idea behind that as well. So not going to get it this year. I don't know. I mean, you make the playoffs like the Steelers did They got the help they needed. And now, are they going to do anything significant in the offseason? That's the $1 million question. And so we will see if they get the change that fans are hoping for. If not, can we expect more of the same again next year for the nth year in a row? We'll see how that transpires there. But it has been interesting. They make it fun riding that roller coaster wave of emotions. So.
Yeah, I will say Khan being the GM, I do think adds an element of things that there's an element of uncertainty because we did a lot in this offseason compared to what the Steelers normally do, right? We signed Ciamalo, we trade up in the draft to get Broderick Jones. We do these things, right, to make this stuff happen. And I think that does make me think more that even if we won 10 games and even if we somehow win a playoff game, right, which is possible, not going to predict it, but it's possible. I think that Khan will still look at this team and go, there's a lot of areas that need fixed. There's a lot of question marks still. And I'm hopeful that no matter how the season finishes out, that he's going to be the catalyst that says, hey, Mike, I know that we had a 10-win season. You probably want to run a lot of things back. No, we're not doing that. We need to find a new offensive coordinator who actually can innovate things. If you're going to stick around, we have to add some much needed youth to the secondary and to the linebacker core. This, that, the offensive line still needs some holes plugged. Like, we got to go do this. It can't be just, well, let's just run it back with what we have. So I'm hopeful that's the case. But regardless of how it works out, happy to see them make the playoffs. Obviously, never going to be disappointed about that. And we'll see if they can make some noise. I think it's more possible than you would if you would ask me like even 7-8 weeks ago. Probably would have told you no. Now we'll see if we can ride Rudolph for a couple more games and see if we can get him probably even more money, whether it's with us or someone else. So we'll
I mean, it's a playoff game, Shayne. It's entry into the tournament.
Yes.
Crazier things have happened. We saw it.
Absolutely.
We saw the Ravens and Joe Flacco just get hot at the right time. So
that's right.
Well, I mean, no reason to root for tanking. Obviously, at this point, the pick is going to be what it's going to be.
Yeah.
The Steelers can't get higher than X amount of pick. I think it go 19th is the highest they can get. That is if every single underdog wins this week and the Steelers lose. And so the likelihood of that happening is not good at all. I mean, you're going to be picking in the 20s somewhere at this point. Let's see how far we can go.
Yeah, right.
Go Steelers this weekend. So
absolutely got to root for it at this point now that we're in it. But that'll do it for us this week, guys. We will be back tomorrow on our main Still Curtain show, but this will be the first episode of the Curtain Call in a while. We'll be trying to keep doing this during the off season. I'm probably going to try to make this more of a like draft focused and more just open discussion focused one, and we can let the main show be our actual breakdowns of news and things that we actually hear that we can talk about more directly. So again, every Wednesday and hopefully Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. you can expect us here Eastern time. And you can follow me on Twitter at Shayne Kubas on the screen here, and you can also follow Tommy here at Tommy Jaggi. Just our names makes it simple. And we'll see you guys tomorrow.